Hey, good evening, and welcome to the Ride Along Radio Show. Today is Thursday, January 28th, man, and we're at show 15, if you can believe that. Wow. Every week I say that because every week I'm a little more amazed how deeply we've gotten ourselves into this. And
this new time, to me, it's just darker. It's just darker right now.
I know, even though we're in the same same room. Pick your mic up, I guess, right?
Me? Right there.
Okay, we good? All right. So, yeah, and as we try to, I was going to say, and it seems like this is getting easier and it's getting a little more smooth each time, but then Gil's mic was out of position, so
yeah,
I guess we did. We're all right, though. At least we can joke about it now and not freak out about it. At least I can not freak out about it now. So,
well, it's weird because in real radio, people can't see you, so.
Real radio, terrestrial radio, people can't see you.
I'm sorry.
Right.
My bad. That's my bad.
Remember back to the days when the first show we did and the guy called in and he said, hey, this is for the guy in the green shirt. And you and Kent are looking around like, how does he know what we have on? Yeah. These guys were so used to doing terrestrial radio where nobody can see you. That they were kind of forgetting cameras. That those are cameras right there.
I don't really know if I signed a waiver and if my agent approves of this, so I'll have to check on it.
Well, we'll have to see if there's royalties involved or something.
My legal. I have to check. Contact
what do they
my
call
legal.
that? Not royalty. What do you call that? Residuals.
Yeah.
You get residuals later on. Yeah. So again. So welcome to the Ride Along Radio Show. Welcome. Thank you for jumping in the car with us for this 1 hour shift that we're gonna pull tonight on a ride along. And the premise of the show is that you have a panel comprised of police officers, most importantly, former police officers. So you get the benefit of our training, our experience, our informed perspective, but you don't have to worry about us being manipulated or pressured or speaking to any departmental talking points or having any kind of a political agenda because neither one of us are running for office. Neither of us have any aspirations to return to law enforcement. So we can say what we want and we can give you how we really feel about things. And that's very rare that you're going to get that.
Right. And it's not just how we, quote, feel, close quote, about it, but we're going to tell you about facts about it. So you might have some feeling about police officers or use of force or whatever, but we'll give you the facts about that in an unfiltered way, and it will likely hurt your little feelings.
And we're here to do just that. And so I'm George Holt.
And I'm Gil Contreras.
And you'll find that although we have shared police experience, that we sometimes wildly vary on opinions about things. We typically agree on law enforcement issues, though. Typically. Not always.
Okay.
Typically. They're more so than anything else. I think that's where we find our common ground is on issues related directly to law enforcement. And we worked together a long time ago. We actually.
Yeah, my hair actually wasn't this color.
Yeah, mine either, and I had more of it.
When I first met you. So.
See what I did to him? So one of the things we've started doing, we've taken to doing, is doing a follow-up from the last show. And last week's topic was the legal use of deception in law enforcement. And we didn't get any bad pushback on that, really. We got...
I'm surprised.
Yeah. And that, usually... I thought people would be screaming about entrapment, et cetera, but right. I think we addressed that maybe. So
well, I think we're kind of hitting the mark that you kind of set when you talked about doing this, and that is giving the listening or viewing audience, just the straight scoop on street things, street
right.
level police work. This is what it is. This is you might think that, but here's the truth.
Right, exactly.
And I think as people are getting used to us, and by one of the comments that I read from last week, she actually said, "I really enjoyed this show."
I'll read you the quote because I have it prepared. This is from Penny Barlow, and thank you, Penny. She says, "I absolutely love this show. I never get to listen live, but look forward to it on YouTube every week. Thank you for just giving us a different perspective." And that's what we came out to do. So you're welcome, and thank you for the kind comment, because that's exactly what we set out to do.
Right.
And to give a different perspective.
And I think that's why when you asked me if I wanted to be involved, I said yes, because that's kind of what what I want to do. And based on, when you see or talk to our guests later on in this show, I think about these things, and there are things that I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about kind of the shift in attitude towards law enforcement right now, and so if we can kind of bridge that gap with information and people actually go, oh, okay, well, I never thought about that, or I never even considered that different perspective, then I think this is worth continuing to do.
Oh, certainly. And that's what's so important to me is that we do bridge that gap, because there's a serious disconnect out there when people want to know, how come you didn't just shoot the gun out of the person's hand?
Right.
Or how come they didn't just shoot the guy in the leg? There's a reason that doesn't happen, and we're always more than happy to explain that to anybody who wants to know. Not going to get into that right now because we've already covered that. But the next time there's a controversial shooting or police use of force, we'll be certainly glad to break that down again and delve into that. So typically from here we segue into our news of the day segment. And you got something preloaded for us?
Yeah. But before I get to the news of the day, though, I just want to say that I was asked to participate in a series, a local radio station here in L.A. did a series called Officer Involved, where they looked at officer-involved shootings in L.A. County for the last 5 years. And they came up with some really interesting data about officer-involved shootings and who was armed and who wasn't and which agency had more of them.
Now, they talked about L.A. County agencies or all L.A. County agencies, or they focus on the sheriff's department? Or
it was all L.A. County agencies.
Okay.
So it was every agency within Los Angeles.
When we say agency, we mean police agency.
Correct.
So they weren't concerned about
all the little cities.
Yeah, they weren't concerned about the Department of Water and Power. And,
no.
those other agencies like the gas company. We mean law enforcement agencies, be they police, sheriff, highway patrol, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And so in the weeks to come, we're hoping to have one of their team members that worked on that series come in and shed some more light on officer-involved shootings, because I know that's that's on.
What came out of that were they surprised? Were you surprised by the findings? I mean, we don't want to jump the shark yet, right? But I mean, to kind of give us like a preview into what was found.
I was not surprised by the numbers. And or the type of incidents that actually led to an officer-involved shooting, and if there was one flaw to the study, it is that in the discussions after they had the data and they had numbers, when they discussed it with their experts and stuff, and they're mostly academics and activists,
right?
They were trying to find the racial thread to this.
Right, the racial component.
Correct. And they just, and it just wasn't there.
But they were looking for it.
And they were struggling in their discussions because they just, academics and activists just won't accept that police officer-involved shootings, especially when the suspect is a black or a Hispanic, they just cannot accept that race doesn't play a part in that.
Well, it doesn't. I think that, I hope they weren't thinking that it always plays a part in it. Were they trying to approach it from that angle, that it always plays a part in it?
They were hoping to, I think they believed that, but they were hoping to at least prove that at least sometimes it does. And they didn't get that. And the findings were really, because when in the discussion, when the interviewer asked one of the team members, the one that I hope to get in here, he asked her, well, what's been the response from local law enforcement about your study, about the series that ran?
Right.
And she said, the word they used was muted. It's like, man, when you hear anything.
Right, tell us something new.
Right, and that was it. It was nothing earth-shattering. It was nothing I didn't already know. I didn't know the specific numbers, but.
You say a panel of experts, and you said they were academics.
Correct.
And they were activists. And, when people talk about expertise, like when I watch sports, I understand there's going to be professional broadcasters in the booth.
Right.
But to me, it's always better if there's athletes in the booth, too. People who've actually played the game, because they can break down for you why this happened or what may have been going through the quarterback's mind,
right,
and why he threw the ball that way and maybe resulted in an interception or whatever, right? But I look at these kind of experts who have not played the game, kind of like movie critics.
Right.
There are not very many movie critics who have been successful directors or screenwriters. So these aren't people who really participated in the craft directly, so much that they have sat back and pointed their fingers. And as someone once said, they never built statues to critics.
Right.
There's never a statue of a critic any place. But there are statues of people who have actually done it. So when I hear that there's a panel of experts, quote unquote, and I'm making air quotes for those of you listening on the podcast later and can't see this, I always wonder, is your expertise is garnered from the sideline? Or did you suit up and get out there, and that's what makes you an expert? Because there are people who are both.
Right.
There are academics who are former police officers.
Right.
So,
right. So, but I think academics they just love numbers. They love data.
Right.
Let's get a bunch of data and let's crunch it in certain ways, and let's see what it tells us.
anybody who's taken a statistics class, or at least a college level statistics class, can tell you that on day one they tell you that statistics can be manipulated.
Right.
Right.
Well, I think it was
how you want to skew it.
Wasn't it Will Rogers who said there's lies, damn lies, and statistics?
Exactly right. So,
So anyway, but we hope to have them in here to have a discussion, because they did come up with some interesting numbers, and I think the audience would find it, at least as it relates to LA County, kind of interesting how often and
well, and and
officers
people, and I know there are people all over the country and hopefully outside the country who watch the show too. And of course, a lot of this stuff is going to be LA based or Southern California based, because that's where we draw our expertise from. But keep in mind that in terms of law enforcement, Southern California, particularly LA County, has always been very leading edge, very cutting edge on a lot of things. And a lot of police trends that begin here tend to travel eastbound.
Right.
And they pick up momentum as they move to the east. And also, we are the largest state in terms of population, so that we see crime trends here a lot of times that don't happen elsewhere.
Right.
So the response, even though you see it here, don't think of it as it being localized or being regional, because eventually it's coming to a town near you. And I figured that out when we started seeing Crips in Alaska.
yeah.
and we had a gang in East LA called the East Coast Crips.
Right.
Well, then there actually were Crips on the East Coast eventually.
Right.
And that always blew me away, man. So typically these things start here. So pay attention here if you want to kind of get a lead on what's going to be happening in your neighborhood or your town.
Yeah, and law enforcement attitudes, officer attitudes, are very different here than other parts of the country.
Very different.
And that's really interesting to me. As when I was a young police explorer in high school and deciding that I wanted to go into law enforcement, that was one of the things that I noticed, is there was a whole bunch of stories of corruption, from New York City and Chicago and
New Orleans.
New Orleans, and here we are in 2016, and I'm not a teenager anymore, but I'm still hearing about the corruption in Chicago and
And we've had some scandals out here, but nothing like there. I mean, our scandals typically because we beat somebody, shot somebody, something like that, right?
Well,
but typically not that there haven't been cops who were dirty cops who've taken bribes and taken drug money and all that, but it's not like we have people who've joined the police department because there's money in the corruption side of it.
Right. It happened in
some other cities,
and especially in the 2000s. Rafael Perez and Rampart Crash and those guys, and the influence of rap music and hip hop culture in Los Angeles. They were kind of crossing over.
Well, see, but I think that came out of, and I know we're going to get to our topic, believe me, and we're going to get to our news of the day, but that came out of these guys, because they were police officers, being accepted into that world because they had very special skill sets or access or whatever. And, we didn't see that with, say, rock and roll. That came, rap is the rock and roll now, right? But we didn't see that in the 70s with rock and roll. And that just may have been because there was such a heavy drug culture in rock and roll, and it was just not happening in law enforcement at all. And then as we see the two maybe getting a little closer to the middle and et cetera, that may have been why that happened. But death row was a huge part of that, and Compton PD was kind of the conduit by which all that occurred. And we both knew guys that worked Compton PD, so and that was a great agency, but it did have its flaws.
And they were, there were some good street level cops out there in Compton PD.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, let me get to my news of the day. So I'm going to put my glasses on and take my radio newsman voice. As you know, I used to do the morning news. Had a short stint over at 980 KFWB, where if you gave me 20 minutes, I gave you the world.
All right, the whole world.
Yeah.
The whole wide world.
But so this is my news of the day. Earlier this week, Jada Pinkett Smith called for a boycott of the East Coast, claiming that the media is unfairly portraying snow as white. Jada said, "Black ice doesn't seem to be getting the same coverage as white snow." And in a related story, Spike Lee said later yesterday that he supports Jada's boycott of the East Coast, and he plans to hold a Black Ice Matters rally in Washington, D.C. later this month. So we'll have more for you as this story develops.
Now, see,
George,
you told me that you were going to start off with a topical joke, but I didn't see that one coming. I heard somebody mention that earlier, and I said, okay, but I didn't think you were going to come with that one. That's all right. Okay, that's a good one. Dun, dun.
Yeah.
All right.
Black ice matters.
Black ice matters. Right. There you go. Our topic today is disaster preparedness, and specifically preparing yourself for a disaster and preparing those around you. And my news story today is related to that. We all know what's going on in Flint, Michigan, where we had a water crisis that they decided, instead of taking water from Lake Huron, they decided to take it from the Flint River. That was done as a cost-saving measure by an emergency manager that was appointed by Governor Snyder of Michigan. And unfortunately, the water in the Flint River was corrosive, and that caused the lead in the pipes to leach out, and we end up with contaminated water in the area of Flint, Michigan. And there's this, well, hey, we didn't know, and it's been going on for such a long time, but there's an impact. For those of you who don't know lead, there's no acceptable minimum amount of lead in the human body. There's no safe level of lead. You're not supposed to have any lead in your bloodstream. And once your lead gets in, it doesn't come out typically. So it's just a cumulative effect over the years. And it can cause all kind of issues, especially to children at a certain age in terms of their IQ and them not growing to their full potential mentally. So the governor of Michigan has said, well, we just found out about this in November of last year, really is when it really came to our attention that we needed to do something about it. Well, Mother Jones broke the story today that back in April of last year, I'm sorry, not in April, in January of 2015, they were shipping water in to their own employees, the state was, because they had said something apparently internally in an email that, hey, this water's not safe to drink. So probably to avoid the liability for the workers' exposure issue, they started sending bottled water for their own people to use while they were in Flint. But that wasn't put out there as far as dealing with the residents, and the problem continued. How that ties into this is one of the main points that I want to get across to you, and Gil said it before, do not rely on the government to save you should something happen. Right. This was something that wasn't even of crisis proportion yet, and the government didn't react quickly enough. And I don't think that it was done intentionally. I think that there wasn't the political motivation to do it right or to do it quickly. So I don't think they purposely moved slowly, but they didn't move quickly, and they would have moved quickly had it been in a different situation. So this is an example of people there now who are having to bring water in to that location, even though they have a municipal water system. It's just no good. So you have to be responsible for yourself in that situation, unfortunately.
Wasn't it that, though, that they did know, but because they were told to save money, that whoever did know that the water was contaminated and not potable for drinking, that they just stayed silent and said, well, hey, we were told not to.
And that's the thing that kills me about this. And I believe that is the case. But they found out, they said, well, we can treat this water in order to make it not so corrosive that it won't leak. So there's not lead in the water per se. There's corrosive elements in the water that causes the lead that's already present in the pipes to leach out. So the water itself doesn't have the lead, but it has chemicals that leach lead into the water. And there was an additive that they could have put into that water that would have counterbalanced that. It would have balanced the pH out, and it wouldn't have made the pipes leach the lead. Mm-hmm. And they didn't do that, even though they said it would have cost like $100 a day to do that. And they said, we're trying to save money here. And think about that. That's $36,500, right? And the city of Flint didn't want to do that. That's probably half of a police officer's salary out there.
Right.
One police officer.
Well, over there it's probably pretty close.
Well, yeah, right. So anyway, so that's my story, is that now it's come out that they've known about this for longer than anybody thought. And, a lot of times you're on your own. So we're going to go to the break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to delve into our topic here, which is disaster preparedness. If you've got any questions, please call in at 323-293-3375, or you can tweet a question at Right Along Radio, or you can send us an email at rightalongradio@gmail.com. Intern Darren's going to check all that stuff at the break, and we'll see you after the break. Okay, and welcome back to the Right Along Radio Show here on the Morris Media Network. So our topic today is disaster preparedness and the importance of you as individual citizens being prepared for disaster to strike. And when we talk about disaster, it can be man-made disaster, such as a riot or some sort of civil unrest, a large or widespread arson. We've seen that happen before. Or it can be something that's a natural disaster, tornadoes, floods, out here earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunami, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kind of things that can happen. Right now on the East Coast, people are we're trying to get out of their homes because of this huge nor'easter storm.
The snow, right?
And they
it's the white snow.
The white snow. There you go. Right. So there's a boycott. But nice callback. But those people are pinned in there kind of, and you had to be prepared to wait it out until the snow stopped and you could come out. And so they knew it was coming, so people were prepared. But that's a short-term thing, and city services weren't shut down by that. And unfortunately, there's been cases of city services failing during natural disaster. You only have to look back to Katrina in 2005 and the response there in New Orleans, where the city typically, unfortunately, just wasn't ready.
Or Hurricane Sandy in 2012. I remember seeing news.
Oh, that was Jersey, right?
Yeah, I remember seeing news footage of people going through Dipsy dumpsters trying to find food outside of the restaurants, going through the trash cans trying to get something to eat because they ran out of food. And there was one.
See, we saw Hurricane Sandy coming too. We saw Sandy coming. We saw Katrina coming. And so I don't understand, but I think people were relying too much on the government.
Well, that's the thing is that the other woman I saw in the community, the news guy was out there trying to interview people, and there she is in her jacket, and she's crying on the camera, and she's saying, "Why won't anybody help us? Where are they?
Right,
well, we have no water. We have no." I was like,
"Well, and
oh
you
my
know
God."
what? And we've seen that breakdown on a large scale and at a small scale too. On a large scale, it was where are they?
Right, whoever they are.
We've seen on small scale, we've seen people, police officers, firefighters, et cetera, abandon their posts to go see about their own families. And that's not what's supposed to happen, but it happened.
Right.
Okay? So you're having your societal infrastructure there that's supposed to be your emergency response infrastructure that has fallen apart in some cases. So you need to be prepared for that. And if that means you need to have cases of water, if that means you need to have food rations, if that means you need to have cash on hand, because remember the big Y2K thing we were all afraid of, right? Everybody was told, hey, go and get your money out of the bank because ATMs aren't going to work and all. That didn't come to pass, but people were freaking out about that.
Right.
And I almost kind of wish it had happened just to get people in more of a preparedness mindset, But people are very, very reliant on things being the way that they always have been.
Right.
And when they're not that way, people freak out. That doesn't mean you need to go all the way to the left and become a disaster prepper and build a bunker in your backyard or everything.
Well,
you should be able to make it through a weekend.
I think Kent Lee would take issue with that. He's at
his
his bunker
right
now.
Yeah, he sent me a text message. He's sitting on his property. He was drinking beer when he sent me a text message earlier. Yeah, you guys will notice that your fan favorite Kent Lee isn't here this week.
That's right.
But he's out in Arizona preparing his disaster prepper bunker.
Sure, because these are tumultuous times. It's an election cycle. Everything's topsy-turvy. Nobody knows what the hell's going to happen. We might even end up with Donald Trump as the goddamn president. And if that happens, what does that mean for for all of us down here at the bottom? I don't know what that means. What if Bernie Sanders, a goddamn Marxist, what if he ends up being the president? We're really going to be in trouble then. So that's why I kind of invited these guys that, because we're going to talk. We're going to tie this into kind of disaster preparedness, kind of urban survival should things go south.
Right. And especially keep in mind, we have never had a global catastrophe. We've had there's even World War II, which is the hugest thing that happened in the last 100 years in terms of a global catastrophe. Even that didn't touch every corner of the earth. There are nations that were completely untouched by World War II happening. There were nations that didn't get involved. There were nations who kind of sat that out. Same thing with World War I.
We tried to.
Been going on.
We tried to,
but we got pulled into it, right? We tried to sit it out. Yeah, we really were trying to sit it out until we couldn't. But so there always have been places to go. We've seen the financial markets collapse in other countries, and people came here, or they shifted around. So don't think that it's going to take. There's all kind of catastrophes that you need to be prepared for. And they're not always earthquakes, fires, floods. Sometimes they're man-made like social unrest or catastrophic collapse of the financial markets, right? And you need to make sure that you're prepared to survive that. So now we have a video that's queued up. And it's kind of a light take on disaster preparedness, but we thought that it would send a good message to people. So check it out.
All right. I know this isn't any fun to talk about, but we should. Okay, so who's going to do what?
I'll pack the dead batteries.
Great.
I'll only put what I don't need into a duffel bag.
Perfect. That's totally unhelpful.
No problem.
Meanwhile, I will try to comfort everyone by speaking in a calm voice.
And I'll try to get the generator going without any gas.
Oh, let's not forget the cell phones, which probably won't work.
Right.
And who is going to handle supplies?
I can forget to do a list for us.
Thanks, pal.
Well, I think we couldn't be any less prepared. I'm proud of you guys.
Okay, so that's kind of a jokey take on it, but I think it drives a point home to be prepared. I'll give you an example of something that happened here in Southern California about 2 months ago now, probably less than 2 months ago, the San Bernardino terrorist attack. Okay, even people who were not directly impacted by that terror attack were impacted by the terror attack in other ways. I know someone who works about a mile away from that building where that happened. Mm-hmm. And we had, they couldn't leave their building because everything was locked down. People couldn't leave the building to go to lunch. Okay. And there were people sitting at their desk who didn't have any way to get through that period. They were sitting there hungry. Fortunately, they had some coworkers who were prepared and they had snacks and food items in their desk or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they were kind of rationing out pieces of Snickers bars and that sort of thing. And people said Halloween candy or whatever. But think about what that says. What do you have in your car if you're on your way home and there's an earthquake? If you're on your way home and there's something that caused you to be stuck on the road for a day, we've seen that happen before. People get stuck overnight. Do you have a blanket in your car? Do you have water in your car? Do you have an extra pair of shoes? A lot of ladies like to go to work in these high heel pumps. You can't walk home in those. So you should have an extra pair of shoes in the back of your car. Doesn't mean you need to go out and buy some new shoes, but maybe you take some old shoes because they're already broken in, right?
Right.
And you throw those in the back of your car. And those may not be the ones you want to go look cute in, but they're the ones you could walk home if you need to. Right. Walk home in if you needed to.
And this is where, bug out bags come in, where, having your go bag or bug out bag, whatever you want to call it. And it's really funny because with Patricia, my boo,
right.
When, and she saw my bag, right, and I put it next to the bed. She goes, "Hey, what's that?" "Oh, that's my bug out bag."
She goes, "What's a bug out bag?"
What's a bug? Yeah. So, in case of a thing, I try not to scare her, right?
Right.
She's like so not into any of this, right? She works in the restaurant business. That's what she does.
Right.
So, I kind of explained it, and well, what do you have in it? And I was showing her my stuff, flashlights and food and clothes and changing, stuff wrapped in plastic and fire, and she goes, "Oh, okay. Well, where's mine?" I said, "I don't know."
Right, where is yours? That's a good question. I'm glad you asked.
I don't know. And so then, she was like, "Hey, wait a second, I have a bag too."
So get your stuff in there.
So,
exactly.
So she put her own, on my vest that I wear when I work with the dog. I have my blood type.
Right. Sure.
And apparently they can,
they can type it. I used to do that. I used to wear dog tags when I was on SWAT in case I got hit, and we used to write our blood types on the back of our hands. Remember that when we do search warrants?
Right.
And but now they can just type you. They
right.
they don't even listen to that anyway. They just type you.
It was funny because when she saw mine hanging there, she goes, "Is that your blood type? This is A positive, right?"
Right.
She goes, "Yeah." She goes, "Oh, well, how come I don't have one on my bag?"
Well, because you didn't put one. I don't know your blood type.
I don't know. What's your
right?
So we had to go get B negative and clip
it on there.
So now they're like, "Oh, okay."
Now you know which is
now
which
we're
too.
matching.
And now you know which is which, right?
Well, one's Cammy, and one's not. So.
Oh, all right. Well, she wasn't going for the Cammy, huh?
No.
This is the main thing, and this is the main reason I think that people do not prepare themselves, because they think it won't happen.
Right.
Or it won't happen to them, or that happened to those poor people over there, but it won't happen to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can happen to you. And what you can do is you can be totally unprepared when it happens, or you can take steps now to mitigate it, because when it happens, you're going to wish you had done something about this. You're going to wish you were just a little bit more prepared.
Because, when something happens, it just catches you off guard, and it's always at the worst time.
Right.
Just yesterday, I'm at home and, I'm feeding the dogs, right? So I feed the dogs and then I go, okay, well, I'm going to make my lunch now. So I go to wash my hands. There's no water. I was like, oh, what happened? Now I got to go outside and see why there's no water.
Why there's no water.
And then so I see, oh, yeah, they had to shut the water down because there was a problem with it. Oh, okay.
Man, what if you've been in the shower all soaped up when that happened?
But for that when I turned the thing and nothing came out.
That's a shock,
I just went, oh, shit. And then I was like, wait a second. I went to other ones. Right? I turned what the
Right. What's wrong? What's happening? Because you're so used to that being the case all the time.
My mind won't accept that it's not working.
It would be like if I did this with this pin and it just hung in the air.
Exactly.
You're like, where's the gravity? What happened to gravity? Because you're just thinking it's always going to be there.
Right. And so I had to kind of like, oh, okay, wait a second. There's no water. So now I got to find out why, and then what does it mean? Because that will dictate now what I have to do.
Sure.
So
because now I'm going to respond to this,
right,
instead of just being in a tizzy and being totally unprepared.
Correct. So that's why the conversation of the video that you just showed, those kinds of conversations, is kind of funny as that was. Those are critical, and we have to start thinking about those. And the guests that we're going to bring on in just a bit here,
we're ready for them now. Actually,
the reason I wanted to have them on to join this discussion is because, a few years ago, when I was teaching Homeland Security at a vocational college, and I met one of our guests there. He was teaching accounting and taxes, and that's what he does. And, we got into a conversation one day about the financial situation. It was around 2010, 2011. And just as Occupy movement was kind of coming on, and Greece was collapsing, and, other countries in Europe were beginning to collapse. And I was like, hey, what the hell's going on here? Well,
can that happen here? Right?
Yeah, exactly. And so do you want me to introduce them?
Yes, let's do that. And
okay.
He's been sitting here very patiently.
Yeah. So this is Luis Bravo, and Luis Bravo is a certified tax guy. He's got a company, and I'll let him later give you his website and info if you're interested locally here. But he's my tax guy. He's a tax guy for my corporation, for my company. And he helped us form our LLC and get everything up and running.
Nice.
And so now I kind of rely on him for information, and then whenever we get together to do tax stuff, we end up having these 2-hour conversations just about the state of the world and the economy.
And you have to be cognizant of that, right? You shouldn't be caught off guard by something like that,
right? And then by Skype, and I don't know, is he up on Skype? Okay, so up on Skype, I have George Bueno. George, are you on?
I'm here. Good to be here with you folks.
Okay. So George is the founder of the Entrepreneur Training Bootcamp. He also leads workshops on business startup and funding. For the past 10 years, he's taught his students to acquire precious metals such as gold, bullion, silver, and ammunition. He volunteers at the Red Cross and is active on their disaster action team. So Jorge and Luis, welcome to the show. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
to be on.
So, Jorge, maybe I'll just kind of start with you. So, one of the reasons I wanted to have you guys on and to kind of tie into our disaster preparedness conversation is kind of the state of money. A few years ago, when I realized that the $100 bill in my wallet was nothing more than a piece of paper with green ink on it, and there's this grand agreement that it's worth $100. Now, if this agreement is ever broken, that piece of paper, whether it has 100 or 1 on it, will have the same value, and that's 0. And that really scared me. So what can you tell us about just our monetary system? Can you give us just a little bit of background and why this information is important to everybody?
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on. George and Gil, thanks for this opportunity. Your listeners are very are savvy. I took a look at some of your replays, and I get a sense that you guys are the real deal. You know what you're talking about, and so your listeners will appreciate this. When we talk about currency and the little pieces of paper that are rectangular in shape that are in your wallet, the average person, they don't know whether that's currency, legal tender, negotiable instruments, or is it just a Federal Reserve note. Now, it's all of the above, but it's not money. Because really what's money is gold, and that's been money for 5,000 plus years. So everyone on the call needs to kind of turn their light bulb on and start realizing that at one point or another, they need to get their hands on some gold bullion and some junk silver or some silver bars, so that when crap does hit the fan or something does happen, a drastic event, they can at least get past the checkpoints. They can get beyond the gangs. They can get beyond the roving criminals and cartels that are around, because money is universal, and that's what I'm talking about when I say gold. Pieces of paper, yeah.
Jorge, before we go too much further and we get into the precious metals part, with regard to U.S. currency, now I know that we were used to be on what was called the gold standard. So the money that was printed in the United States was backed by all the gold at Fort Knox. Now, at some point in the 70s, I believe it was, we were taken off the gold standard. And what is the impact of that on U.S. currency?
Well, I'll give you the 30-second version. And listen, gentlemen, what happened in the Great Depression is that the banks were colluding and they were being very risky. So we brought up the Glass-Steagall Act, which kind of kept them in line. And then in 1944, through Bretton Woods, we convinced or brainwashed the entire world to deposit their gold with us because we were the gold standard. And since we had dethroned Great Britain and we became the global reserve currency in the 20s, and we're still the global reserve currency until we're not anymore, then we told them, hey, we're good as gold. But then in 71, President Nixon went on TV and said, I'm sorry, we're no longer, you can no longer trade your bills for gold. So we fell off the gold standard. But because we have the most powerful military, we were able to still keep the entire world under our control through the petrodollar. So we forced all the countries to only purchase Saudi oil using our global reserve currency, which is still the US dollar until it isn't anymore. But yeah, the dollar's being undermined. Russia and China have their own trade agreements. They have their own version of the World Bank, their own versions of SWIFT, their own versions of the BRICS nations. And so those agreements, gentlemen, are already in place so that whenever China or Russia wants to push the button that's called forget about the US dollar currency, they can push that button at any time, and will cause a huge devalue of our dollar, which happened in Zimbabwe in 2008, Argentina it happened throughout history, Mexico in 94.
Now, Jorge, you talk about their own version of the BRICS nations. The BRICS would be Brazil, Russia, India, and China, right?
And South Africa, correct.
And,
yes.
and so the BRICS, so that's S now, and that's in there. So you're saying their own version of that. What is so that would require all those nations to be in collusion on something like that, right? As opposed to our one United States having that sort of influence or sway monetarily, correct?
Correct. Correct. And what it comes down to is that the United States, being the big bad bully that it is and the police of the world, the countries are getting tired of it. And so what happens is that when we do sanctions on Iran and we tell Iran, hey, you can't use the US dollar banking network, SWIFT network, to transfer funds.
Right.
And we kind of block their access. These other nations, the BRICS, the ASEAN nations, what they've done is they've set up their own banking infrastructure so that they can bypass the dollar at any time. A lot of companies are insisting on getting paid with the Chinese yuan at this time. So we're actually getting much closer than people think. And thank goodness for people like you and your radio show, because we need to start getting these people ready, gentlemen.
So why is this important to everyday working people, Jorge? I'm not sure. I think there's a disconnect, and maybe, Luis, you can jump in here too. But
yeah,
maybe there's I think there's a disconnect between the conversation that we're having in this moment right now and the everyday average working person who doesn't give this a second thought, I think, for the most part.
So
yeah, the main reason is that they don't teach civics in school anymore. And the average man is so hyped up on the NFL and on NBA and watching guys put a ball into a hole that they don't have a chance to really pay attention to what's going on with global commerce.
So bread and circuses.
Right.
As Julius
yeah,
Caesar
of course.
said.
Distraction. And
right, distraction.
Vacations. And
did you want to add something,
Luis?
Yeah, I want to add to what Jorge was mentioning. It's already happening. There was an article just about a month ago that now China is part of the International Monetary Fund, is now taking the lead against the U.S. dollar. So that's a warning signal. That's something that we don't see in mainstream media. You will only see it in alternative news, and once we see that the U.S. is losing territory over the world market, then that should be something that should be of concern.
Now, I heard the story today, and maybe you guys can shed some light on it for me, but I understand that as a result of that $150 billion being released back to Iran, that the Ayatollah Khomeini has already gone to several countries and is already doing deals using that money. Is it in U.S. dollars or is it in this other currency that you're talking about?
That information I don't have. I don't know. Jorge would.
That's had an impact on oil prices too, right? Is that the same part of that same deal?
Well,
Of course, of course. And what Luis mentioned is absolutely correct. Gentlemen, the money that's being released to Iran was money that we hijacked from them originally because we cut them out of the U.S. banking system. So we're just basically
We
giving
froze
that
their
money back to
assets
them.
too. We froze their assets once the U.S. embassy was overtaken in '81, right? Was that
Yeah, we
81?
froze their assets, and that caused them to start trading in gold,
79,
which is-
79, yeah. Okay, and so so basically we gave them back their own money, is what
Yeah,
we're
we're
saying.
giving it back,
with
and
interest,
that's
though.
what's- And that's what's propping up the U.S. dollar. That we're countries like Iran, we're giving them back the money, and so they're spending it in commerce. So it's artificially inflating our U.S. dollar. So Obama goes on TV and says, "Oh, the dollar's strong." Well, that's only because the Chinese and other countries are exercising their bonds that they own, and they're denominated in U.S. dollars since we're the global reserve currency until we're not anymore. And that's the only thing that's propping up our dollar.
Now, when you say till we're not anymore, now we actually just got a tweet with with a question from Ismail, who's tweeted us before. The Saudi Riyal depegging. Are you familiar with that? With that no longer being pegged to the U.S. dollar, I'm assuming. Ismail, is that correct? Gentlemen?
Yeah, I can chime in on that. What's happening with currencies around the world is that through the International Monetary Fund, we force countries to be on peg with us. Now, countries like China, they
Now, when we
manipulate
say
their-
peg, and when we say peg, we're talking about having their currency directly tied to us in terms of a ratio.
That's
of
right.
1-to-1?
That's right.
Okay.
It's like if you take a look at the euro right now, the euro is probably $1.09 versus our U.S. dollar, which is a dollar. And then you look at Canada, they've been experiencing some devaluation, and they're about 69 cents or 70 cents. And so that's how they peg it to us. But at some point, what'll happen is that they'll find a different peg that's more stable. And remember the Iran situation. The story that you hear on TV is that they were going to be building nuclear weapons and so forth. But the reality is that Iran has so much oil, but they don't have the capacity to refine it. Now, if they had the money and to build the nuclear refining facilities, then they could undermine our U.S. hegemony with the Saudis and our petrodollar. So we couldn't have that as a country because when you look at in history, currencies really don't last that long, and we're already overdue.
I was going to say, yeah, we've been in the driver's seat for so long.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Jorge and Luis, I remember in 2009 when I was teaching Homeland Security at a vocational college, and I remember watching an interview with Timothy Geithner, who was President Obama's Secretary of Treasury in the first term. And one of the things he said that and I was stunned that it didn't get wider play because I found it. I'm sure CNN could have found it. But in this interview, he said that we had accrued so much debt that and the conversation was about the increasing debt that Obama was putting on top of what 2 terms of Bush Cheney had done. And what Timothy said was he said, well, naturally, if we continue to put more debt, what we would like to do is we'd like to get so much debt that the dollar actually collapses, and then we could introduce a new kind of currency for North America, Central and South America called the Amero.
The Amero. Remember that whole thing with the Amero, right? I remember that whole conspiracy theory about that.
Was that a conspiracy theory, or was that because Timothy Geithner, who was the Secretary of Treasury, was actually talking about actually letting that happen?
Yeah, I'll let Luis go, and then I'll chime in.
Luis?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Whether it's a conspiracy theory, I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. I think it's still possible. It's just that they just pass so many delays. They keep pushing. What's that term? They keep pushing everything forward. They keep delaying. They keep
kicking the can down the road.
Kicking the can down the road.
There you go.
Yes, and the way they're kicking the can down the road is just they're printing too much money. They're printing money each
And somebody's going to have to pay for that one day.
And they're just trying to find ways of how to keep it as just sustain it as to a point where, okay, how far can this go?
So we're just are we? I mean, I feel like just regular working people, we're just in a daze here, because we have the Fed, who's keeping interest rates low, and then cranking out dollars that aren't backed by anything. And so the moment they begin, the quantitative easing, the moment they begin, and it began actually in December, the raising of interest rates by the Fed, what's going to be the impact of that? Like, how quickly can something go really south really fast?
Well, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that we have a bubble. First, we have the college bubble that of too much education. Our student loan debt has.
Now, you say education, you don't mean people being educated. You mean the debt that comes along with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Sure. A lot of bad loans on that too, and a lot of people defaulting, running to Europe,
right,
and defaulting on their student loans.
Yes, the student loan debt has already exceeded credit card debt. Now we have also the dollar bubble. Believe it or not, just from too much excessive printing, that we're reaching a point where there isn't going to be any more exit other than a default.
Well, now, and to tie this right back to the everyday person who's listening to this, when that happens, again, there's all kind of disasters. This is an example of a man-made disaster, and when that happens and the dollar's no good, your police departments aren't going to be getting paid anymore. Right. Your fire departments are going to be getting paid anymore. And one of the things Jorge mentioned was ingots or bullion, gold, silver bullion,
right,
and bullets. You know, a lot of your survivalist types, a lot of your prepper types, they've been saying this for years. They've been buying gold. We saw the price of gold go up over $1,500, and now
it was 18 at its highest.
Right, and now it's fallen quite a bit. But it skyrocketed at one point about 4 years ago, I think.
It skyrocketed because there was paper gold trading. I remember reading something about J.P. Morgan manipulating gold prices, and that's
they wouldn't do that. Yeah,
and then eventually that's what caused the increase in gold prices. But it was just paper trading. And,
it was a big pump and dump scheme.
Yes,
probably. Yeah.
Yeah. So the true value of gold was there, but what was inflating it was all the paper trading. And eventually, once that paper trading reached a peak, eventually that caused the collapse in prices. And of course, for the average person, they're going in to invest in gold to just like a stock to buy low, sell high.
That's not what happened for a lot of people.
No, they say, oh no, this is not this is a bad investment. But no, you want to acquire gold as an insurance.
Right. So the old adage of buying gold low to sell high to get more dollars, that's not the strategy anymore. No. Now it's to buy gold and hang on to it because you're going to need to use that as currency. Or you might have to use that as currency.
Yes.
And you guys have probably heard this, and I heard this for a long time ago from a guy who was into this, that for a prudent investor, obviously your portfolio of investments needs to be diversified, right? But he recommended that you have silver, gold, stocks, and bonds. And he said ideally you'd want 25% so that you're not over-invested in any one sector. Now, of course, you're spreading your risk around, but you're also spreading your reward around too, right? But in terms of stability, in terms of having something that's going to be there, because when one goes down, the other one goes up, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sorry, he didn't say silver and gold. It was cash, gold, stocks, bonds. That was a breakdown. 25% cash, 25% gold, 25% stocks, 25% bonds. Now, this doesn't touch on the bullets aspect of it, though. Right. And the thinking for a lot of your survivalist types is that when paper money is no good, you will have to use gold because people won't accept anything other than gold. And I saw people on eBay buying little grams of gold and grams of silver because if you have an ounce of gold and you need to get a loaf of bread, you're not going to give that person somebody an ounce of gold for a gun or a loaf of bread or whatever you needed.
Right.
You needed to have smaller denominations of it, right?
Right.
And in terms of carrying that across the checkpoints, as Jorge said, that's carrying a lot of gold across a checkpoint is not going to be as easy as one might think. Right. So I mean, in terms of that being a survival strategy, which one do you think is better for you in a what do they call it? The end of the world as we know it. I forget that. There's an acronym for that they use, right?
The shit hits the fan and
yeah, shit hits the fan scenario. The end of the world as we know it.
Right.
Jorge, I'm thinking that the bullets in many cases may be your best investment in terms of a currency of sorts, huh?
I agree. You must have barter items close to you, whether it's coffee, ammunition in the typical rounds that the everyday person uses, and also rounds that law enforcement uses. And remember, military might be called in a devastating event like a Yellowstone super caldera, volcano erupting, or some kind of flood, or an electromagnetic pulse, or maybe even a coronal mass ejection or solar flare that can wipe out electronics. So one of the things that your listeners also have to take special attention to is you must have a plan B and have an offshore savings plan of some kind. Meaning you should have money, not just dollars and small denominations in your grab and go bag and your bug out bag. You should have some cash on you, because the average person, that's what they recognize. And the more sophisticated person is going to recognize gold and silver, the weight, that type of thing. But you should have a plan B set up in another jurisdiction, be it another country, Mexico, Panama, somewhere in Europe, so that when we experience something in the U.S., you still have your cash hoard, your stockpile of money, and you can still access through your debit cards and your European bank account or Mexican bank account the money that you would need, because perhaps it's not devalued over there. It would be devalued here, but it might still be okay there.
And the key is to convert the dollars into that currency. You don't want to keep it in U.S. dollars, but convert it into
right, because it wouldn't be worth anything there. And that's but for the average person is thinking, well, man, that's for millionaires. I can't do something like that. But actually, you can, just on a smaller scale.
Right, and you can do these automatic, just set it up so whatever amount of money you make, every paycheck.
Direct deposit, right?
It just goes, just set it up so it's automatically. So you don't have to think about it, don't have to remember to do it. It just all,
But I think people are afraid, because what we've seen is people in other countries have put their money in American banks because their political systems were unstable. And it's anathema to our thinking as Americans that we would then put our money into countries that we believe may be unstable or may be less stable or could be unstable one day. And people think, well, if that happens, then my money is gone, But now, and then when they changed the Swiss banking laws where there was disclosure where there wasn't disclosure before, right. People don't really think that I should take my money and put it elsewhere. It almost seems un-American probably to a lot of people.
Right. It doesn't to me, because major corporations are doing it, and they have money and I don't, not to the degree that they do. And so I look at them and I go, hey, if they're doing it, I probably want to do it too.
Well, yeah. And so how would somebody go about doing something like that? I mean, would you have to go to that country to open that account up? Or
how do you do that?
It can be done online nowadays.
Okay. You just find a bank in a country that you think you might bug out to, and
yes, you have to do your research. For example, HSBC Bank is one example of having that international connections. There was one source that I was looking for. If, let's say, people that they can open a small account somewhere in Hong Kong, for example.
Okay.
And of course, you have to see what are the requirements.
Will they keep your money if something happens? What if we go to war with China? Are you going to be able to get your money out of there? We look and see what happened, how we froze Iranian assets here, right? And there's a lot of Iranians who had money that didn't have as much money anymore.
Jorge, is there any value to setting up an account in the Cayman Islands or the old Swiss bank thing, or did 9/11 and the Patriot Act just make all of that null and void?
Yeah, great point, gentlemen. In fact, there's something even more dangerous than what happened as a result of the Patriot Act and the Freedom Act and all of the different acts that actually don't do what they say they do. Okay, you have to look at the FATCA, FATCA, Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, and this just went into effect in July, actually just last year, and it makes it so that the Treasury has bullied countries around the world to not do business with U.S. citizens. So it's really difficult nowadays. A lot of banks don't even want to do business with you. So what you have to do is set up an international bank account. You'd have to have an international business company, which is an international corporation. Then the corporation opens up with a bank account. It could get pricey, but there's ways of doing it. I have a system that allows you to do it for super cheap and get even a free gold savings account.
Well, We're definitely going to have to talk offline.
Yeah, we'll talk
Jorge.
offline. But you know what? Now we'll have both of you here, and we're talking about foreign currency. And Ismail's asking about money being depegged. You guys may remember a good 10 years ago, there was this big push for people to buy Iraqi dinar. And the thing was that there was a new currency that was coming out and that it would be pegged to the dollar. And I knew so many people, easily 20, 25 people I knew, just me that I knew, that had taken thousands of dollars and put it into Iraqi dinar. And those people said, well, when it pegs to the dollar, it's going to be like, I've got 5 million Iraqi dinar, and the guy maybe paid $500 for it or something like that, right? And he's thinking now it's going to be worth $5 million. Now, of course, this never happened, and people were holding on to that. But also, what they didn't know, because they didn't do their research, and they were trying to get rich quick, was that when they changed the last currency, you couldn't do anything online. You had to walk into a branch of the Central Bank of Iraq with that cash money with Saddam's face on it, and you had to walk it into a branch in Baghdad or Tikrit or Mosul or something, right? You had to go into the Bank of Basra, and you had to turn that money in order to get out the new currency, okay? And people don't think about that when we talk about foreign investment. They could do some rule like that means you're going to go to Iraq? Really? You're going to go to Iraq and walk in, and then do you think you're going to get out? Right? Maybe we better call Kaz and something. We roll in there with Kaz, right?
I'll go anywhere with that dude.
But I mean, you think you're going to be able to get in and get your money and get out alive with your money? So people have to think about that, and that's the only thing I kind of dabbled in, mostly making fun of my teammates who invested into that when I'm on my old SWAT team. People put a bunch of money into that, and those dudes never saw anything out of that. And you know how I know that they didn't get their millions out of it? Because they're still cops. So I know that they didn't get that money that they were planning on getting, right? So, I mean, what do you say to that sort of thing? I mean, currency is a tricky thing, and it's like a babe in the woods when you try to walk into it with a layman's background.
Well, I think that's why you have to have experts, and I rely on Luis a lot to, help me navigate. This is why I kind of hope Donald Trump does win and does away with the IRS, or who wants to do away with it? I think it's Ted Cruz.
Frank Zappa proposed that in the 1980s.
Well, I was a Frank Zappa fan.
Yeah,
so.
Me too. And I know that having just a flat tax.
Because this IRS nonsense is just, I call them 211 suspects without a gun.
211 is California Penal Code section for robbery.
Yeah, I always feel like I'm being robbed every payday. Every time I get a check, I feel like I'm being robbed by somebody that I don't even see.
Well, so in terms of the foreign currency and the risks there, though, I mean, there's risk. Now, maybe you don't want to pick a war-torn country like Iraq. You say, well, I'll invest in the Italian lira, right, or the Japanese yen or something. Those places are pretty stable. Mm-hmm. But still, I mean, you still have to be concerned about that. And then what happens, as the man pointed out, the American government's been bullying these foreign governments from doing business with American citizens. So,
right,
I mean, I think that's tricky.
And all this kind of ties. I want to tie it back in because think of what's going to happen the day that you wake up and you go, you get out of your house and you get going and you go, oh, I better go get some gas. And I go to the gas station, and if you pulled my wallet right now, there's no money in there.
Right.
There's about 10 cards, plastic.
Sure.
But I ain't got no cash.
Right.
I rarely even carry cash anymore. So go and you're swiping. Uh-oh. Well, I can't get gas. Well, I'm on empty. I have to get over there. How am I going to... So I'll pull a different one. What if none of them work? What if I have to go back home? And then I turn on the TV, and there they are saying, oh, guess what? We're doing what do they call it in Greece? A bail-in, where we're keeping all the money, and even if you have an account with money in it, you can't take your own money out.
Now, that's amazing.
Or there's a limit to what you can take out. Can that happen in America, either one of you?
It has happened already. During the 2008 meltdown, one perfect example was IndyMac.
The mortgage people?
Yes.
Mortgage lenders?
IndyMac was one of the major subprime lenders, and unfortunately, it reached a point of collapse. And
SunTrust, too.
Yes.
People were outside SunTrust. I remember that, trying to get their money, and they couldn't get their money.
Well, I was telling Luis that, in 2008 when IndyMac, I remember specifically, it was downtown L.A., my register called me, hey, man, you want to work?
Right.
A bunch of off-duty cops. all working security while FDIC investigators were boxing up all of IndyMac's documents into boxes, putting them on trucks and shipping it out because they had closed it down.
Yeah, I mean, that's a risky thing. But again, this is an example of a disaster and what can happen to your savings, what can happen to your assets, which is why you need to have cash on hand. We talked about this too, having a small amount. I say small. Everything is relative in terms of small, right?
Right.
But if you can scrape it together and put it away, you should at least have maybe $1,000 or at least a couple $100 in cash, someplace that you use when you have to get off the X, when you gotta bug out when that ATM swipe doesn't work.
Because shortly after the swipe is coming civil unrest. When people realize that they can't buy stuff, they're going to start taking it. And
that's when we get back to bullets.
Exactly. So you have to have the training. You have to have already prepared. So you need to be able to just go to your safe. Oh, okay, time to arm up.
Right.
You have the rifle, put a mag in. It's time to say okay, and then you decide: am I staying or am I bugging out to location 2? And gosh, you got to have a location.
I just had a talk with a friend of mine today who about his bug out location that he just bought, and he's like, "Hey, if something happens, I'm good to go."
I know where I'm going. I'm going to Kent Lee.
Yeah. Well, the other guy's closer. So yeah. So listen, we're gonna start trying to wrap our show here. We're at our time.
Oh wow,
that went by quick, didn't it?
Yeah, I just this is the way it goes whenever I meet with Luis for anything. We end up in these 2-hour-long conversations about all of this stuff, and I come away going, "Oh my God, I'm not prepared." And
we've only scratched the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. Jorge, do you have any parting shots for us about what anything tangible that the everyday person can set into motion today?
Absolutely. One of the things that your listeners need to do is to get educated in terms of whatever vocational training they have. Start getting healthier. So if something does happen, when it does happen, they're in great health. Get that LASIK that you've been putting off. Stock up on contacts, medication.
I just did that last year too. Yeah. Great investment. Also,
more importantly, what you want to do is you want to start getting your getting those small denomination gold ingots. Small 1 grams. At the same time, make sure that you're stocked up with your grab-and-go bags and they're fully functional, not just for you, and have them in multiple locations because your house may be collapsed, and if your bag is there, you need to have it in your car and at work and so forth. But I want to give the listeners a little homework, and I know we have to wrap up, but have them look up the Dodd-Frank Act. Chris Dodd and Barney Frank. It was the response to the 2008 collapse, and they authorized the bail-in through the G20 countries. They're already on board. You're going to be last in line to get paid because you're considered an unsecured lender to your bank right now. So your bank account, that money is actually, they can get it at any time they want. And the FDIC does not have enough money to indemnify. So just a little food for thought, go out there, get some training, get basic firearms fundamentals for your listeners if they're not already proficient. Get out to the range often because you may have to protect yourself against the people 7 blocks away who are not very nice.
Right. And
Jorge, and that's what we do. We're both firearms instructors. So definitely with that. Now, Jorge, how can people, do you have a blog or do you have a website people can come and
people can read up on, what I'm doing at codexteam.com, CODEXTEAM, codexteam.com, Twitter at Jorge Bueno. Happy to give some pointers to anyone. And maybe we'll talk again, gentlemen. It'll be a pleasure.
Dynamite for sure.
Yeah, I really like to and maybe get a little bit further into it. And
this would be a topic of its own, actually.
That was a good overview, but now we need to know, okay, what can we do? What should people do?
And we can drill down into it. Luis, how can people go? Do you have any parting wisdom for us, and how can people get a hold of you?
You can look at me at Twitter. My Twitter name is TaxmanLou. That's where I usually post tax tips.
Okay.
It's tax season, so
right
now my brain is more focused on taxes than the macroeconomic portion. But what I like to do with some of my clients is also educate them in this. Because everything is related to how the tax system works. And again, this is an overview. We can go in detail because it's also good to know the history as to what were the major events throughout the just within the 20th century that is having an impact today.
Right.
And
Right,
that's
so you can see it coming.
Yeah.
I just think that black people, Hispanics, working class people, we're so afraid of this stuff. It was like I don't know that I didn't take in.
And we leave it to somebody else,
and we rely on other people.
Now-
and I think more and more what I've learned from Lou. Is you really have to become more proficient in this yourself. He
It's
can
your
advise me.
responsibility, like
It's
everything else we
exactly.
said.
Right.
And speaking of tax time, a lot of you guys are going to be getting your tax returns pretty soon. And if you work for my company, your W-2's already been sent to you. You don't need to call me anymore. We sent it. So go get your taxes done. And when you get that money, instead of going and doing stupid stuff with it, instead of going buying rims or taking a tax refund vacation to Vegas, do what we're talking about here. Take some of that money and put it away. Take some of that money and stockpile some food or some water. If you have limited space in an apartment or something, just dedicate a closet.
Figure it out.
Put under your bed or something, some preparedness stuff for yourself, flashlights, whatever, so that when something happens, you're not just caught out there. Take some of that money and do something wise with it is what I'm saying. You got to have some money coming. Don't screw it off.
Right. I agree. And, Jorge, I want to thank you for agreeing to come on such short notice. And thank you, Lou, for coming in. It was kind of short notice, but I just thought, I felt very strongly about wanting to talk about this. And I think we see now how it really ties into emergency preparedness and being prepared for whatever's coming. This was really, really a great conversation. So
yeah, it's very instructive, very informative. I hope the viewing/listening audience found it to be informative too. And hey, Ishmael, thank you.
Well, they can leave a comment if
question.
they thought it was worth.
Yeah, and hey, leave comments on our YouTube. Check us out. So you can follow us at Right Along Radio on Twitter. You can like us on Facebook, or you can send us an email to rightalongradioshow@gmail.com. And again, Ishmael, a great question on the depegging thing, man.
Yeah.
So, folks, we'll catch you next Thursday, and we'll see you then.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.